You know, when you hear the name James Stewart, there is almost certainly a very specific image that pops into your head.
Oh, absolutely. The aw-shucks, perfectly innocent hero.
Right. You picture the guy running through the snowy streets of Bedford Falls in It's a Wonderful Life, just, defining small-town American decency.
The ultimate boy next door. It's a very comforting image.
It is, and here's the ultimate contradiction of today's subject. Beneath that folksy surface was a fiercely driven combat pilot, a guy who flew heavy bombers through, like, intense flak over Europe and eventually became a brigadier general.
Yeah, and beneath that hesitant drawl was this ruthless, calculating businessman who personally broke the Hollywood studio system.
Exactly, not to mention an actor who Alfred Hitchcock used as a literal scalpel to explore some of America's darkest, most neurotic obsessions.
The contrast between the public myth he cultivated and, well, the private reality he actually lived is genuinely staggering. I mean, he's arguably the most complex anomaly to ever come out of the studio system.
So, welcome to this deep dive. Today we are exploring the life, the career, and the profound duality of James Maitland Stewart.
It's going to be a fascinating journey.
Our mission is to look at the sources we've gathered and really uncover the real man behind the everyman myth. We need to figure out exactly how a lanky kid from a Pennsylvania hardware store became the blueprint for the complex American hero.
Right, and our sources trace this incredible arc to get us there. From his early, honestly, disastrous theater flops, straight through his meteoric rise during Hollywood's golden age.
And we can't ignore how the sheer terror of World War II completely rewired him.
Exactly. He weaponized that internal change to fuel this incredibly gritty, remarkably dark post-war reinvention.
Let's start right in the basement of that hardware store.
Yeah.
Because before he was a Hollywood icon, James Stewart was just a kid who was supposed to, design buildings and eventually take over his dad's shop.
Yeah, born in 1908 in Indiana, Pennsylvania. Deeply religious, staunchly Presbyterian family.
And his father, Alexander, ran the J.M. Stewart and Company hardware store. Taking that over wasn't just an option. It was the absolute unbending expectation.
Which was a bit of a problem because young Stewart wasn't exactly the focused heir apparent. I mean, his teachers noted he got pretty average to low grades.
But not from a lack of intelligence, right? He was just a daydreamer.
Exactly. Intensely creative, always living in his own head. He'd spend his afternoons in the basement doing chemistry experiments and building intricate model airplanes.
He was already dreaming about aviation. And there's this fantastic detail in the sources about his early self-expression.
The accordion student.
Yes. A customer couldn't pay their bill at the hardware store, so they traded an old accordion to settle the debt. And Stewart just took it, learned to play it from a local barber, and it became a lifelong fixture for him.
It really feels like the classic origin story of a quiet kid finding a loud instrument to, do his talking for him.
Right. But his father wanted him to be practical. So he pushes his son toward Princeton University, his own alma mater.
He even had to go to a prep school just to pass the entrance exams. He had to completely abandon those aviation dreams for a while.
But he gets into Princeton and actually thrives. Majors in architecture, excels academically, and even wins a prestigious scholarship for graduate studies.
And his thesis was brilliant. It was a comprehensive design for an airport terminal. So he was sort of merging his dad's demand for structure with his own obsession with flight.
I love that. But then he catches the acting bug. He gets involved with the Princeton Triangle Club.
Yeah, and instead of taking that architecture scholarship, he takes a massive left turn. He joins the University Players, which was a summer stock theater company up in Cape Cod.
That decision alters everything, mostly because of two people he meets there, Henry Fonda and Margaret Sullivan.
Stewart and Fonda eventually moved to New York together, and they are just completely broke, sharing this tiny apartment, trying to survive in the theater world.
And his early acting days were objectively terrible, weren't they?
Oh, completely disastrous. Getting bit parts and failing at them. He was literally fired from a stage manager job in Boston just for missing his cues.
Wow.
Yeah, and in one Broadway play, his entire contribution was just walking on stage and throwing a $250 banjo out a window.
Which a New York Times critic actually praised in print as constructive abuse. That is so funny. But eventually, an MGM talent scout spots him and brings him to Hollywood.
But the studio executives took one look at him and had absolutely no idea what to do. The notes literally described him as a lanky young bumpkin with a hesitant manner of speech.
It's like a sports team drafting a generational talent but playing him in the wrong position. They wanted the booming confidence of a Clark Gable.
Right, and they completely missed that Stewart's power was in his quiet, vibrating vulnerability. They marginalized him because they just couldn't categorize him.
So how does he break out of that?
Well, Margaret Sullivan intervenes. She was already an established star, and she campaigned fiercely for Stewart to be her leading man in a 1936 film called Next Time We Love.
Ah.
She rehearsed with him relentlessly, built up his confidence, and helped him mold those nervous, awkward mannerisms into a really specific, boyish screen persona.
You know, I always assumed his trademark stammer, like the hesitations, the physical awkwardness, was just genuine stage fright. Was he just paralyzed in front of the camera and they kept rolling?
You'd think so because it looks so natural, but it's actually the exact opposite. It's a highly calculated, inside-out acting technique.
Wait, really? So he was doing it on purpose?
Completely.
Hmm.
Later in life, he deeply resented being called a natural actor because it completely erased the immense craft he was employing. He didn't use fake accents or heavy makeup.
This nice pacing.
Exactly. Cary Grant once pointed out that Stewart understood how human beings actually communicate. In real life, people interrupt each other. They lose their train of thought.
They struggle to find the right word.
Right. And Stewart used those stammering pauses to create this vacuum of anxious space on screen. It forced the audience to lean in and wait for him. It looked like an accident, but it was absolute architectural control of a scene.
Oh, wow. So he masters this calculated style. But to the studio executives, hesitation still looks like weakness.
Yeah, until director Frank Capra comes along. Capra looks at that hesitation and realizes it's not weakness. It's the sound of an honest man weighing his conscience.
Capra realizes Stewart is the perfect American idealist.
Yes. Capra noted that Stewart understood these deep American archetypes intuitively. He barely needed directing. So he casts him in You Can't Take It With You, which wins Best Picture in 1938.
And the very next year, they make the massive political comedy Mr. Smith Goes to Washington,
where he plays Jefferson Smith, an idealistic, gangling young man thrown into a deeply corrupt political arena. It gets him his first Oscar nomination.
He's brilliant in it, but he loses. Though he does win Best Actor the very next year for The Philadelphia Story, beating out his old roommate, Henry Fonda.
Which is funny because Stewart himself believed he truly deserved it from Mr. Smith. He suspected the Academy was just playing catch-up.
What I absolutely love is what he does with the physical Oscar trophy. He doesn't put it on a mantle in Beverly Hills.
No, he packs it up and sends it back to Pennsylvania.
And his dad proudly displays it right in the window of the family hardware store, sitting next to their military medals.
It's just so on brand. And by this time, he's a massive radio star, too.
Yeah.
Comedians are already making a living just impersonating his slow drawl.
Well, his appeal operated on a totally different frequency than other stars. Like, Cary Grant was aspirational. Audiences wanted to be Cary Grant.
Right, but Stewart was the exact opposite. He was the everyman. Audiences watched James Stewart because they felt they already were him, or at least the best, most moral version of themselves.
So imagine the biggest movie star in the world today, like a Ryan Gosling or a Leonardo DiCaprio, reaching the absolute peak of their fame. Now imagine them dropping all of it, enlisting as a private and flying active combat bombing missions.
It's almost unfathomable to us now. But right as Stewart hits the pinnacle of Hollywood stardom, the world goes to war. And he drops everything to live out the heroics he'd only been faking on a soundstage.
He becomes the first major American movie star to enlist in the Army for World War II. And this wasn't a PR stunt.
Not at all. He had deep, entrenched military roots. Both grandfathers fought in the Civil War. His father fought in the Spanish-American War and World War I.
So in early 1941, months before Pearl Harbor, he tries to enlist. But he's actually rejected at first, right?
Yeah, he was deemed underweight, but he absolutely refuses to take no for an answer. He was already a licensed commercial pilot with over 400 hours of flight time.
So he bulks up, pushes his way into the Air Corps, and enlists as a private. But the military immediately tries to put him in a safe PR role.
They did. He even made a recruiting film called Winning Your Wings that brought in like 150,000 new recruits.
Which is wild. But raising morale wasn't enough. He literally fights his commanding officers, demanding a combat assignment.
And he gets it. He's sent to England, based at RAF Debenham. They put him in the cockpit of B-24 Liberators, flying heavy bombing missions over Germany.
We really have to understand the terror of this. These bombers were unpressurized, freezing cold, deafeningly loud.
And constantly flying through flak and enemy fighter fire. He was watching planes around him explode. He was watching men under his command die.
On one specific mission over Germany, his quick decision-making under fire actually saved his entire group from annihilation.
Right, and he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the French Croix de Guerre, and the Air Medal. He survived the absolute nightmare of aerial combat and rose from a private to a full colonel in just 4 years.
That's just incredible. He wasn't wearing a uniform for the cameras. He was out there risking his life, carrying the responsibility for his men.
And he didn't just quit when the war ended. He stayed in the Air Force Reserve for 27 years, eventually becoming a brigadier general, the highest-ranking actor in American military history.
He even flew as a non-duty observer in a B-52 bombing mission during the Vietnam War. But coming back to Hollywood after WWII, that level of trauma must have impacted him heavily.
The psychological toll was profound. He went from pretending to be a hero to carrying the literal weight of human lives. When he came back in 1945, the naive bumpkin was entirely gone.
He heavily considered quitting acting altogether, didn't he?
Yeah, he thought about just going back to Pennsylvania to finally run that hardware store. A new wave of intense method actors like Marlon Brando was arriving, and he felt completely lost.
But Frank Capra pulls him back from the edge. Capra pitches him, "It's a Wonderful Life."
And looking at our sources, it's wild to realize that this beloved American Christmas classic was actually a commercial disappointment at first. It failed to even cover its production costs in 1946.
Stewart was plagued with deep anxiety during the filming, but if you watch his performance as George Bailey closely, especially the second half, you see the change.
The despair, the frustration. When he's standing on that snowy bridge contemplating suicide, that is not the boyish James Stewart of the 1930s. That is a man who knows exactly what the abyss looks like.
From there, he pivots hard away from the aw-shucks persona. He teams up with director Anthony Mann for a series of incredibly gritty, violent westerns in the 1950s.
Movies like The Naked Spur and The Far Country. He's no longer playing the idealistic sheriff. He's playing troubled, vengeful, bitter cowboys. Men violently struggling to control themselves.
So he was essentially using his acting craft to process the fear and anger he couldn't express during the war?
Exactly. He rarely spoke publicly about his service. He kept it entirely locked away in his private life, but he let it bleed out on screen.
And audiences still remembered his pre-war innocence, which made seeing him in these dark, violent roles profoundly shocking.
And no one weaponized that dark side better than Alfred Hitchcock. They made 4 films together, but the undisputed masterpieces are Rear Window and Vertigo.
Hitchcock takes this ultimate, trustworthy everyman and uses him to explore deeply unsettling psychology.
In Rear Window, Stewart is confined to a wheelchair, acting almost entirely with his eyes and facial twitches as he spies on his neighbors. He becomes a voyeur.
And in Vertigo, it's even darker. He plays a man so obsessive and deeply neurotic that he forces a woman to change her appearance to look like a ghost of someone he lost.
Hitchcock exploited our inherent trust in James Stewart to make us completely complicit in his character's twisted desires.
It's brilliant. And while he's executing this artistic reinvention on screen, he's simultaneously executing one of the most ruthless business moves in Hollywood history off-screen.
The Winchester 73 deal.
Yes. For this 1950 Western, his agent, Lew Wasserman, brokers a revolutionary deal. Stewart agrees to take absolutely no salary up front. Instead, he demands a percentage of the film's profits.
We need to pause and look at the economics here. Under the old system, actors were basically just salaried employees. Whether a movie made $10 or $10 million, the actor got their standard weekly paycheck.
The studio took all the risk, but they kept all the reward. Stewart essentially walked in and said, "I'll take the risk. Pay me nothing, but give me a cut of the back end."
He turned himself from an employee into a venture capitalist. It was a terrifying gamble, but it completely paid off.
The movie is a massive hit. He walks away with about $600,000, which is astronomical back then.
And other massive stars saw this and immediately demanded the exact same terms. This single deal is widely credited with permanently dismantling the old Hollywood studio system.
It perfectly encapsulates the duality we're exploring. On screen, he plays the simple, honest man. In the boardroom, he's a multimillionaire investor who rewrites the economics of the entire film industry.
And that intense compartmentalization carries over perfectly into his private life. For a long time, the gossip columnists dubbed him the Great American Bachelor. He didn't marry until his 40s.
He had highly publicized romances, though. Ginger Rogers, Loretta Young, Olivia de Havilland.
Even an affair with a married Marlene Dietrich during Dusty Rides Again. But our sources reveal a much quieter, melancholic reality underneath the tabloids. He carried a very long, unrequited love for his early mentor, Margaret Sullivan.
The woman who taught him how to translate his acting to the screen.
Exactly. He was entirely smitten with her from their early days in Cape Cod. But she viewed him more maternally. Out of shyness or maybe caution, he never explicitly forced his romantic feelings onto her.
He just chose to stay close to her as a lifelong friend.
Yeah. He finally settles down in 1949, marrying Gloria Hattrick McLean. They adopt her 2 sons and then have twin daughters together.
They remained married until her death in 1994, but there is a heartbreaking echo of his own military service that ripples into his family life.
Right. One of his adopted sons, Ronald, served as a Marine Corps lieutenant and was killed in action in Vietnam in 1969.
It was a devastating loss. True to his guarded nature, Stewart bore the grief with intense stoicism.
He maintained publicly that his son had not died in vain, leaning heavily on his deep conservatism and unshakable military pride to process the tragedy.
Which brings us to perhaps his most famous and most unlikely friendship, the lifelong bond with Henry Fonda.
Oh, this is fascinating. These 2 men were roommates as starving actors. They both became absolute titans of Hollywood. But politically, they were complete and total opposites.
Stewart was a staunch, lifelong conservative Republican, campaigned for Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. Fonda was a staunch, outspoken liberal Democrat.
And the sources detail a legendary incident in 1947 where the 2 men allegedly got into a literal fistfight over their political differences.
Just picture that. George Bailey and Tom Joad throwing punches at each other over politics.
Stewart later claimed they never actually came to blows, but whatever happened in that room was severe enough that they made a strict, unbreakable pact afterward.
They agreed to simply never discuss politics again for the rest of their lives, and they stuck to it.
They really did. Stewart and Fonda literally fought over politics and then spent the next 30 years silently flying kites together.
These 2 massive, wealthy Hollywood icons would just hang out, quietly build model airplanes and fly kites, just sitting together in comfortable silence, completely avoiding the topics that divided them.
Focusing on the simple hobby they'd shared since they were broke kids in Manhattan. When Fonda died in 1982, Stewart's only public comment was, "I've just lost my best friend."
It is a profound lesson in how Stewart navigated his entire life. He built these massive, impenetrable walls between his rigid beliefs, his deep traumas, and the people he loved.
To synthesize his legacy based on everything in our sources, James Stewart's enduring power really rests on a very specific, almost impossible tightrope walk.
Right.
He had this unparalleled architectural ability to symbolize pure American honesty and vulnerability. He was the ultimate trustworthy movie star.
But simultaneously, because he had experienced such profound, real-world trauma, he had the depth to show us our darkest fears, our neuroses, and our deep capacities for violence.
He wasn't just playing simple characters. He was projecting fractured pieces of his own complex psyche through the comforting lens of the everyman.
He showed us the terrifying shadow stretching out behind the white picket fence. And that brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive.
Yeah, think about this next time you watch him.
Exactly. The next time you sit down to watch a classic James Stewart film, whether it's the idealistic joy of It's a Wonderful Life, or the creeping dread of Vertigo, don't just look at the charming smile. Don't just listen to that trademark hesitating drawl.
Look closely at his eyes during the silent, still moments.
Ask yourself, what is the combat veteran, the grieving father, and the brooding artist holding back? Consider how the ultimate ordinary man was, in reality, the most extraordinary, calculated, and complex anomaly that Hollywood ever produced.
Brilliantly said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay insanely curious, and we'll see you next time.